can relate to this because I was a master procrastinator. I'm still a master procrastinator. If, for example, I would get an assignment that has a 0% Turnitin score, that's the first red flag for me. The way that I'm coming at this is not just as somebody who's an educator, but I'm also somebody who's a researcher, and I'm also trained in the way that people learn, and I'm very much interested in how people can develop their own critical thinking skills. I have some views that are deemed controversial, which I don't think should be, but you can judge for yourself. So one of the things that I think is a golden rule of AI use is that if Let's talk about AI in the academic space and how my views have changed over the last couple of years since I started talking about AI and since I have come into contact with it. My first ever video on AI was released on the 3rd of July 2024, and since then I have published about 11 or 12 YouTube videos just talking about AI in particular. By way of background, I'm somebody who has acquired quite a few degrees, so the process of learning for me is very interesting. I have 2 undergrad degrees, one in mathematics, another one in business. I have 1 master's degree that was a research master that took me 2 years, and I have done a PhD that took me 8 years, story for another day. And I have also gone on to get training in education. So I am deemed to be a specialist in education, and I have chosen to focus on critical pedagogy. So the way that I'm coming at this is not just as somebody who's an educator, but I'm also somebody who's a researcher, and I'm also trained in the way that people learn, and I'm very much interested in how people can develop their own critical thinking skills. So with this as the background, I hope that I will be able to show you like some of the things that I see about AI. Some of them have been intriguing, some of them have been intimidating, some of them have just been outright crazy, and I think for some of them we should all be just a little bit scared. So this is it. And also I think it's worth mentioning that at this point, I think most of the interaction that I get about AI tools is from the TikTok platform. So here I'm already at more than 38,000 followers, and I have more than 3.7 million views and about 12,000 comments, with a significant number of those comments being about people's perspectives on AI. So some of the videos that I made on YouTube were actually in response to the most common comments that I used to get during the time. And I'm going to walk you through whether I have changed my position on any of those and why. I think ultimately, if you are really trying to understand what are the big questions when it comes to AI and what can you do for yourself to empower yourself when it comes to AI, this live is for you. I think regardless of my reservations, so I'm already going to out myself, I'm anti-AI when it comes to the academic space, and I have some views that are deemed controversial, which I don't think should be, but you can judge for yourself. But at the end of the day, I think what I want for not just my students, but anyone who has any kind of work that intersects with AI, you should be empowered enough, you should be literate enough, you should know enough about AI to make your own decisions about whether it is good for you and the extent to which you're going to engage with it. So hopefully through this live, I'm going to be able to give you some things that are going to help you on that journey. So let's get started. I'm just going to go through the videos that I've released over time, reflect on the things that I think I could have been wrong about and the things that I am even more convinced I was right about, and maybe just throw back a few questions back to you in terms of thinking about it. So as I already said, my first video on AI was released on 3 July 2024 on YouTube, and I was equating the use of AI in academic writing to intellectual doping. So I used a sports analogy to talk about how people in elite sports actually push their bodies to achieve what is beyond the realms of our imagination in terms of what we think we can do with our bodies. So Simone Biles was one of the examples that I used because she seems to do impossible things with her body. It does seem to defy the laws of gravity. And then based on that, I was talking about how in the intellectual space, essentially we are expected to do similar things with our minds. So we are preoccupied with pushing the boundaries of human thinking and knowledge creation to beyond what we think is possible up to that time. And if we are preoccupied with that, then the argument was that in the same way that in elite sports they take doping seriously, we should take the use of AI tools in the academic space in the same way. So when these tools actually take over our thinking and they take over our control over the process, it essentially amounts to intellectual doping. How I feel about that video since that time, I believe more than ever that this is the case, because we start to see evidence coming in that actually there is a trade-off to be made, whereas these AI tools actually do make people more efficient. They can do things faster than ever. There is also a concern and a lot of evidence, a lot of documented evidence that it is affecting critical thinking. It's not just in the academic space. So there's an MIT study, for which I also made a video, and I'll get to that later, that actually showed that I think they called it the accumulation of cognitive debt, where students who were using AI in a very short experiment of 4 months, I won't bother you with the details, but they were able to show that they reduced their cognitive load, which was good, but they also struggled with the critical thinking. They struggled to internalize the information that they had processed, and they struggled to remember the things that they had processed, and they also struggled with a sense of ownership. So they didn't feel that connected to the work that they wrote, compared to the students in that experiment who had actually used their brain only as part of the process of writing essays. So in that sense, we can question whether this analogy was useful or not. I think recently someone commented under one of my older videos to say intellectual doping is a very bad comparison, because whereas we can detect if athletes have actually doped, we cannot detect if people have doped in the intellectual space. And I would argue that it's a question, because we cannot measure it, can we argue that it is not happening? I think indeed, when I think about people who come forward and they talk about their concerns with AI use, a lot of them self-report that they are struggling with kickstarting their thought processes, and sometimes they are not able to even start writing without using AI tools. So in this case, just because we're not able to measure it yet, I don't think that we can argue that it is not happening. And the MIT study actually did show that there was what they call the cognitive debt related to that. So that was a good starting point, I think. And I think now more than ever, we start to see the evidence that it may not be a good analogy, it may not be for everyone, but I think it does serve its purpose. And I hope people can find it relatable when they think about their own situations. And then at the back of that video on the 26th of September in 2024, I released a video where I was essentially talking to university students and asking the question, are you becoming dependent on AI? And what I was trying to do with that video was to actually get students to self-diagnose, to be able to look at their situation and their interaction with AI tools and be able to say if they were in trouble or not. So there were 4 things that I talked about in that particular video. I think one of the biggest ones, and I think is one that a lot of students need to be careful about, because this usually becomes the entry point for AI dependency, and that is your motivation for using AI tools. Why are you reaching for an AI tool to complete a piece of assessment, especially where the parameters have been clearly set? So in universities, we know that they're taking different positions, and we also know that sometimes in some modules you are allowed to use AI without any restrictions, but in some modules they might actually ask you to use it within certain parameters, and in some they might even say don't use it at all. So if you would reach for these tools in those instances where you are asked not to use them, or you would use them in the ways that you have been asked not to use them, then you should start to worry, because it's probably telling you that you are not well prepared for the particular assignment at hand. And I can relate to this because I was a master procrastinator. I'm still a master procrastinator. So I'm known to do things in the last minute. And in the olden days, when I was a student, if I actually left things for too late, I had to pull 3 all-nighters in a row or something and drink coffee and pray that I could actually pull it off. So that lack of easy way out actually forced me to still engage with my work sufficiently to develop in the intellectual sense. But now you can be 2 hours away from a deadline, and there's an AI tool that can generate the work for you in a matter of minutes, and you can turn in that piece of work. So with that being available, it's very easy to fall into the temptation of doing it. And I think when I hear from people who reach out to me with their issues with AI, the first time they did it, they felt it was bad. They knew it was bad, but they convinced themselves that they didn't have a choice. Then they did it a second or third time. It didn't start to feel any better, so they couldn't get rid of those bad feelings that they were doing something wrong. But at the same time, they also didn't know how to get out of it. So one of the problems that I think we need to be addressing in the university space is indeed the problem that students are reporting that they are becoming dependent on AI. They will not necessarily tell their institutions because it's treated as an academic integrity issue, and I'm going to get to that at a certain moment. And as a result, there's really no help, right? So if I have mental health issues, a lot of universities actually have a resource to support me. If I have financial issues, I can get support as well. But if I have AI dependency issues, there is no help. And there is no warning sign, there's no warning label that comes with these AI tools that tells you you could become addicted. So be careful how you engage with these tools and be careful about your motivations for using them. But this video, I think, will be great for anyone who is trying to think about whether they have a healthy relationship with AI. I think more than ever, those questions are relevant because now we are more than 2 years into the timeline. We've had enough iterations and enough engagement to get a sense of what is happening. But I think the most important thing also coming out from that video was 2 of the ways that I talk about is if you generate content using AI, are you able to evaluate it? So can you say whether this is good work or bad work? Are you able to be critical towards what AI spit out? If you are not, then you probably have a problem and you're going to have to put away those AI tools and actually invest in understanding the concepts that you are dealing with. So one of the things that I think is a golden rule of AI use is that if you are using AI to augment certain skills, so I'm already a good writer, for example, I'm already well versed in the literature that is out there, and then I just use AI sometimes to tweak text or to generate a first draft for my LinkedIn post that I'm going to then look at and revise, then it's perfectly fine. It's not how I would use AI, but to each their own. So if people would use it to augment already existing skills, I think it's a perfectly reasonable approach. But if you find that you are struggling with specific skills or you're struggling to understand a particular concept and you use AI to mask that lack of understanding, then you're already on dangerous territory. Because a lot of the learning that you do at the university level builds on each other. So if you use AI tools to suppress or make it invisible to educators that you are struggling with something, 1, they're not going to be able to help you on time. 2, you're not going to get any better. And 3, you are making yourself a slave to AI tools. So you are going to be at the mercy of these tools because you don't have any other alternative. So that's something that I would like to leave you with. And then something that I also say in that video is that just check your confidence. If you see your confidence start to dwindle over time and you have been an avid user of AI tools, then you also have to check yourself because you might have actually become AI dependent. When we do education right, we become more confident. And it's not because we become all-knowing, but we actually become good at creating knowledge, at diagnosing problems, at evaluating situations, even in unfamiliar contexts, in order to come up with solutions. So we always have the confidence in our ability to learn, to uncover very complex patterns, and therefore be able to come up with good solutions. That is what a good education should do for you. If you just know things, that's not enough. So actually my first ever YouTube video was talking about the difference between knowing things and being intelligent. There are so many ways you can know things. It doesn't necessarily make you intelligent, but intelligence is how you come to know things. So one of the first slides that I usually put up for my students in new modules or when I talk about academic integrity is the quote, "It's not what you know, it's how you know." So what you know is not so important, but your processes of coming into knowledge, of creating knowledge, that is what's important. That's what you should hold sacred, and that's what you should strive to become extremely good at, because that's the only way that you're going to be confident. So if I look back on this video talking about AI dependence, again, I think I did hit a lot of the points right. And now I will even say the notion of motivation for use becomes very, very important. It's probably one of the most critical things you have to keep going back to in order to think about whether you have a healthy relationship with AI tools or not. Then at the back of this, because I had just spoken about how to know if you're becoming dependent on AI, I thought let's also talk about something that is more important for universities, and that is the issue of academic integrity. And what I did in that video was talk about the ways in which AI tools are changing the academic integrity concerns or patterns that might be happening. And one of the things that I talk about is that we talk a lot about plagiarism, and a lot of people pre-AI used to worry a lot about plagiarism. But then it meant that a lot of people didn't know that plagiarism comes with a bunch of cousins, and those cousins actually can be more serious problems for you, or they can create more serious problems for you. So one of the things that I talk about in that video is that plagiarism almost disappears in the era of AI. Like plagiarism cases are now pretty much rare, and I think there's a report that recently came out that does confirm this. But then we fall into other serious types of problems, and the biggest one on the end of the spectrum, or now the leading cousin in the academic integrity basket, is what we call false authorship. So when people actually get AI to do their work, sometimes they may get assignment meals to do their work, and then they pass it off as theirs. Then this is false authorship, and it's something that is very much AI facilitated. And what I try to do in that video is to get students to understand, these are the risks that you have to think about, and you have to know that the AI landscape actually changes academic integrity issues. One of the more recent developments, I think, that we see, and I'm not sure if I saw this somewhere or I heard it somewhere, is that the plagiarism scores now fall to almost 0%, or sometimes people get a perfect 0% score on plagiarism. This is a problem. This is a red flag. And the reason that this is a problem is that in academic writing, we have particular terms that we use. So sometimes for a specific discipline, we will have words that we use repeatedly because everyone understands what those words mean. And when you use them, nothing is lost in translation. But then also as a discipline, we have a bunch of phrases that we might use that we try to convey certain messages, what I usually will call signposting in academic writing. So if you are really interested in decoding academic language, I would recommend that you look up the academic phrase bank that was created by, I think it's the University of Manchester, if not Manchester University. I sometimes cannot tell the difference, but the academic phrase bank actually shows you the different patterns that we have or use in academic writing. So how do I show that I'm being cautious? There's a bunch of phrases that we will usually use. How do I show that I'm being critical? There's a bunch of phrases that I use. How do I show that I am speculating about the future? All of that is there in this academic phrase bank. So what it means, because this terminology is almost standard, is that it is impossible. It is impossible to generate a piece of work that has 0% score on plagiarism if you would be doing academic writing right. So it's part of the reason that you will see growing concerns over AI-generated text. They call it slop these days, or they will say it is soulless work, or they will say it is superficial. It could be about anything, because it falls outside of the conventions of academic writing that were actually there for a good reason. They were not meant to make life difficult. So it is something that we now know, at least now I have learned that if we are writing in academic English, it's already a second language, even for academic speakers, because the conventions for writing and communicating in the academic space are different from the conventions for writing and communicating in the everyday space. My experience with the AI tools is that they tend to take a very journalistic tone. They might have been trained on a lot of journalistic things, and then from there some very interesting things happen. So once when I was talking to this linguist, they really demonstrated it in real time, where we were in a room with a bunch of people and they were asked to first write something by themselves, and then they were asked to prompt an AI tool to write about the same thing, and then we were comparing them. So one of the things that came out was that, if you have worked in the academic space, you will know that these concepts or theories will usually have a number of important elements, and there's no rule over what this number is. Sometimes there are 3 important principles, sometimes there are 7 principles, sometimes there are 23 principles. It's just the nature of intellectual work. And when people write in an academic way, they will usually actually recognize these important principles and list them all and unpack them all. But AI tools tend to just pick 3. It's like any 3, but then if there's 7, why are you leaving out the other 4? And that just comes from the style in which it writes and whatever it has been trained on. So this is something that you should be careful about. If you were to get a 0% plagiarism score on an academic piece of work, it's already a red flag. Something has gone seriously wrong. Because if you will do academic writing right, we expect that you'll get a certain score. In my first university in the Netherlands, I think the limit was about 18%. I think I was a relatively good student, and I used to be somewhere between the 8 to 12% range in terms of my plagiarism score. And where I am, I think in some UK universities, it's like 25%. So especially if you would also consider reference lists and other things, that number can actually go up. So to show up with a 0% score means that you probably didn't plagiarize, but actually it could be false authorship. It could be that AI just generated the whole thing. And another thing that tends to happen with AI tools, and I'm not sure if I talk about it in this video, but there's one where I go in greater detail about that, is that AI hallucinates. And there was a time where we were discussing these hallucinations as though they were a bug to be fixed. It's like, oh, it's just a current problem. We're going to get rid of it in the future. And then what happened maybe in the last 6-7 months was that it came out that the more sophisticated the tools become, the more that they actually hallucinate. So for the academic space, it's a problem because we never make things up. Things must actually be real. Your references must actually say what you claim they say. So hallucination is a big problem in the intellectual space. And then a few months ago, I think it was declared that hallucination is a feature. It's a feature, they're saying, of these AI tools. So they are saying that by their nature, these tools are expected to make things up. And if this is their nature, it doesn't matter how well they say an AI tool works. If you pay for some kind of AI tool for it to do your literature reviews, because it's in its nature, it's a feature of these tools to hallucinate, it can still make things up. I personally don't use those tools, but I have heard from quite a few people who have also said that it has hallucinated, whether it was in summarizing or attributing certain claims to particular authors. So as a result, if you're going to have to use these AI tools and then check if there's any hallucination, then you're probably better off just doing the work yourself, because you will know the first time that it is right. And we start to get a lot of big scandals related to that. I think at the moment we have an issue with Deloitte. I think that they provided a report for the Australian government. They had charged about just over 400,000 Australian dollars for that report. Then when it was released, an academic actually spotted that there were some false references in that report, and there were also some hallucinations, some claims that were fabricated or not real or not attributable to the sources that they came up with. And it's making the news right now. Initially, Deloitte promised that they were going to give a partial refund. The government was not having it, and now they're going to have to refund the full 400,000 plus Australian dollars to the government because of that mistake. And we see it a lot in law cases as well. Legal people who have actually cited cases that don't exist, and then it actually compromises a very important case. So at the end of the day, whatever we may tell ourselves or whatever we may believe, I think it's significant that the people behind AI have actually now declared that hallucination is an inherent feature of AI tools. If it's an inherent feature, it's not a bug to be fixed, then expect that it's always going to make things up. And then think about what we consider to be important in academic integrity. The accuracy of sources is one of them. And being able to, once we cite something, we claim that we have read it in some way, shape, or form. And so if we are citing something that doesn't exist, it does compromise our integrity and it creates serious issues. Someone says Turnitin has AI detector, but sometimes it also provides false positives. Yes, this is very, very true. I will even say that, especially for non-native speakers, this is a problem, because essentially what it does is to look at the patterns that are a bit more rigid in writing that will usually be associated with non-natives, right? So our writing doesn't flow as well because we are not really experts in the language. That's one of the issues that are there. And then the second issue is that, yeah, these tools have been evolving to mimic people more and more. So sometimes we actually don't know if it's detecting what AI wrote or it's detecting the way people write that AI would also write. There are issues there. The biggest thing I think that makes a difference when it comes to the detection of AI tools is the references. So if, for example, I will get an assignment that has a 0% Turnitin score, that's the first red flag for me. And I will be then interested to see how the references were used. I will check the references. If I find any false reference, just one, I don't need 10, just one false reference that I just cannot find anywhere, then there's a high chance that there has been a violation in terms of academic integrity. Sometimes it turns out that it's just a referencing mistake, so there may be nothing to see there, but it can, most times actually there has been a violation. Then the next issue relates to the fabrication because of the hallucination feature. So saying that Dube et al. 2016 said something that they didn't say, that also becomes one of the indicators. And I think outside of the Turnitin score, sometimes returning what we call false positives, we also have what I call the fixer AI tools, so the humanizers that are out in the market. So we had, at a certain point, Turnitin was really good at picking or detecting AI-generated text. Then people came up with tools that actually humanize it so that it can actually evade detection by Turnitin. So we are now in this pointless war where essentially it's the battle of AI tools going back and forth, and the human in the middle is having to pay the ultimate price. So I think we either just agree that we are just going to let this be a simulation, let AI write the assignments, let it mark them, let it detect what used, and let it do whatever, so that we can all just go on and get other things. But then what is happening to our intellect in the meantime? What is the point of it? What about the ethical considerations that are meant to actually make us take our place in the world as people that will be trusted and people that are going to deliver the best possible knowledge under different circumstances for the good of all of us?